Perek Eliezer, Perek Mem Dalet. So the Medrash we spoke about before a little bit about Yetzias Mitzrayim. Now the Medrash talks about the story of Amalek attacking Bnei Yisrael as they left Mitzrayim, and then a few different things about Amalek in this perek. So it's the Medrash. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri Omer. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says, "Achar kol hagvuros v'neflois she'aseh Kadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael b'Mitzrayim v'Yam Suf." After all the powerful and the wondrous things that Hashem did for Bnei Yisrael in Egypt and at the Red Sea, Chazru v'nisu HaKadosh Baruch Hu oyev eser pamim. They went back and they tested Hashem another 10 times. What does it mean, another 10 times? Oyev eser pamim. Shneimar, it says, eser pamim. Parashas B'Shalach, it says, in Parashas Shlach, it says that Bnei Yisrael tested Hashem 10 times. So after Hashem did all these nisim and the floys, he took them out of Mitzrayim and created house of everything, still they tested him 10 times. What's the oid? Another kilo, it says another 10 times, as if there were 10 times, there was tests beforehand. The Bnei Yisrael tested Hashem. So the Radal says that it's referring to the fact that by Kriyas Yamsuf, Bnei Yisrael was like, they sort of testing Hashem and saying like, oh, what do? We don't know which way to go, whatever. They didn't have complete bitachon and belief in Hashem. The Marzu says that no, the another 10 times is referring to the 10 times that they tested Hashem 10 times in the Midbar, besides the fact that they had previously tested Hashem in Mitzrayim. He brings the Psukim in Sefer Yechezkel and Perek Chaf, where Yechezkel says that Bnei Yisrael Mitzrayim, they were oyev avodah zarah. Beferish Psukim that says that they were oyev avodah zarah, and we spoke about in Perek Mem Aleph that they got rid of their avodah zarahs by Kriyas Yamsuf, but beforehand they were oyev avodah zarah, and it says in the Psukim in Yechezkel that Hashem sent a Navi, which Rashi over there explains is Aaron HaKohen gave him a nevuah when they were in Mitzrayim, and Aaron HaKohen said to them, stop doing avodah zarah, and they didn't listen to him. So they were testing Hashem over there, and besides that, there were these 10 things that they tested Hashem with in the Midbar. But again, the Hager edition, the Ksav Yad, takes out the word oyev eser pamim, which just says that they tested Hashem eser pamim, not another 10 times. Yeah, what were you going to say?
No.
Furthermore, Shoshinu al Kadosh Baruch Hu, they slandered against Hashem. They said, they slandered, they said falsehoods against Hashem. V'amru, they said, Azav Hashem v'yisonu b'midbar hazeh, v'ein shchinosei b'kirbenu. They said Hashem had forsaken us in this desert, and His presence is not within us. Shneimar, it says in the pasuk, Hayesh Hashem b'kirbenu im oyin. They tested Hashem, saying, Hayesh Hashem b'kirbenu im oyin. Is there Hashem within our midst or not? Maybe Hashem is not really with us anymore. So they sort of denied Hashem's hashgacha in a way. They're saying, is there Hashem or is there not Hashem? Hayesh Hashem b'kirbenu im oyin. Now the Radal asks the obvious question. What do you mean? They just got out of Mitzrayim. They had all these huge, major nisim and floys. They saw all these great miracles where Hashem interfered with the laws of nature and everything. So how could they have a suffix? How could they say, oh, is Hayesh Hashem b'kirbenu im oyin? Of course there's Hashem. What was the shaila?
Previously also,
yeah.
In the end of Shir HaTayam, it said, Ve'aminu
B'Hashem u'Moshe Avdei. So the Radal says that the idea is that they were trying to argue, they were trying to say that Hashem, of course, Hashem is the great Hashem, ruler of the world, whatever. He took us out of Mitzrayim. He brought us. He crossed us over the sea, etc. He brought us into the Midbar, and now he brought us into the Midbar. Now he left us. Now he leaves us on our own. Now he doesn't interfere anymore. That was their hashkafa. Or at least the hashkafa that they were sort of proposing over here. Hayesh Hashem b'kirbenu im oyin. Yeah, Hashem. Of course, there's Hashem, and He took us out of Mitzrayim, everything. But then afterwards, He stopped interfering in the world, and now He doesn't help us.
I just realized that a raya for this argument that Hashem's not help, because there are many times when Hashem doesn't help them immediately.
Yeah.
They need the waters, and where there was no water, so they were getting thirsty. And then they cried out to Hashem. Oh, they're saying, well, is He with us? If He's with us, why didn't you help in the first place? Maybe they're coming from this. Yeah. Maybe He's gone because He's not helping us.
In a way, you could sort of say that there's a progression of Hastaras Panim, where Hashem is sort of hiding the Hashkacha. In Mitzrayim, it was like really way out in the open. And then when they were in the Midbar, it was still there, but it was like a little bit less obvious. And then when they went into Eretz Yisrael, it was even less obvious. Something like that. There's an interesting piece of the Ramah. The Ramah has a sefer called Teres Ha'olah. And in his sefer Teres Ha'olah, he writes that in Sefer Shoftim, in the time of Gideon, it says that Bnei Yisrael were doing avodah zarah, and they were conquered by the Midianites and whatever. So in the time of Gideon, the Ramah explains that they had this hashkafa, this same thing over here, that they, of course they believed in Yitzhak Mitzrayim, that Hashem took them out, whatever, but then they believed that, like, once we got to Eretz Yisrael, or some later point, Hashem stopped getting involved, and now that, Hashem is not helping us anymore, so like we have to do avodah zarah, because we need some help. That was the hashkafa. The Ramah says that was hashkafa. And Hashem did special nisim for Gideon in order to prove to Bnei Yisrael that no, Hashem is still with them. But so this is all the introduction. That first they started doubting the hashkafa of Hashem. Rabbi Shua ben Karcha says, Achar haparsha hazayis maksiv. After this parsha where it says that they questioned Hashem by Nasu where it says they said Hayesh Hashem b'kirbeinu im oyin. So what does it say right after that parsha? It says Vayavoy Amalek. Amalek came upon them. Ba'alehem Amalek lihipora mehen. Amalek came upon them in order to give them retribution, in order to punish them for their doubting Hashem, of saying Hayesh Hashem b'kirbeinu im oyin. Now says the Medrash. A person who's coming from the road, a person who's traveling. So usually the proper etiquette is we greet him with food and with drink. And he, meaning collectively Amalek, saw Bnei Yisrael ayefim v'yegeim. They were tired and they were worn out from the bondage in Egypt and from the troubles of the road, the suffering of the road. It's very hard to travel. And he didn't put it on his heart. So Amalek, usually when you greet someone who's coming on the road, what do? You give him food and drink. But Amalek is not going to do that. Meaning like this. Like we find by Ammon and Moav. So Ammon and Moav, Be'ezer Hashem, this week's Parshas Kiseitze, it says in the Pasuk, Lo yavai Ammoni and Moavi b'kal Hashem. An Ammoni and a Moavi are not allowed to join the Kal Hashem. They're not allowed to marry a Jew. Why? The next pasuk says, Al davar shelikidu eschem melachem v'moyim b'derech v'teischem v'mitzrayim. Because of the matter that they hadn't greeted you with bread and water when you were coming on the road on your way out of Mitzrayim. Right? So there's a taina that the Torah has against Ammon and Moav that they didn't greet the Jews with bread and water. Therefore, an Ammoni and a Moavi is never allowed to join the Kal Hashem. They're not allowed to get married into Bnei Yisrael. But by Amalek, they did even worse. Not only did they not greet the Jews with bread and water, but they greeted them with the sword. They came and attacked them. It was worse than that. Now, of course, this begs the question. So Ammon and Moav is also b'Kal Hashem. You're not allowed to marry them. But Amalek, maybe you're allowed to marry. Amalek is sort of a subset of Edom. Edom is the descendants of Eisav. Amalek is one of the grandsons of Eisav. It's a specific group within Edom. Now, about Edom, the Torah says that a convert from Edom, you're not allowed to marry for 3 generations. The 3rd generation, you're allowed to marry him. Etc. Whatever. Right? So Edom, you're allowed to marry. So what about Amalek? Amalek is really worse than Ammon and Moav. So the truth is that it's a big machlek. It's different mafarshim, and there's rayas back and forth in different ways. Or is Amalek muter lovi b'Kal Hashem? If an Amaleki is megayer, is he allowed to marry into a regular Jewish family or not?
Wow, I don't have a mitzvah to kill them before they're megayer.
That's true. That could be, a lot of the mafarshim said that one of the reasons why he can't be megayer is because they're mechayiv to kill him. But yeah, it's a whole back and forth. I didn't look up the sources about it right now. I have a whole thing about it somewhere else. But the Radal brings another medrash, Tana de Be'elio Rabbah. I have it over here. I tried looking it up. I couldn't find it. But it's apparently in Perikov Daled. It says over there that Eliphaz, the son of Eisav, commanded his son Amalek. He said to him, the Jews are going out of Mitzrayim. You should dig for them pits so that they can have water to drink, etc., and their flock could drink from it. Bring them food, etc. And then Amalek disregarded his father's command and Dafka went and attacked them. That's another medrash that brings out this similar idea. So Al Kapara, it says that Amalek saw that they were tired. They didn't put it on their hearts. What didn't they put on their hearts? The Radal says they didn't put on their hearts to be merachem on Bnei Yisrael, to have mercy, or they didn't put on their hearts to have yiras Hashem, to be scared of Hashem, that they shouldn't attack them. They disregarded those ideas. The Ksaviyad edition of Pirkei Avos, the Higger edition, says v'loisame liboy mitzvahs kavod. They didn't put on their hearts the commandment of kavod. I guess I'm not sure exactly what that means, but there's some expectation that Amalek was supposed to have respect for Bnei Yisrael, and they flouted that, and they didn't have respect that they were expected to have. Rather, what did they do? El Omar al Derech, they stood on the road. Kidoiv Shakul Lohamis Aim Albanim. They stood on the road like a bear that's lost a child, being like it's like in a frenzy. It's gonna go out and kill mother and child, everyone all together. And the Mefarshim point out that we had this expression Kidoiv Shakul, like a frenzied bear. We had that expression said about Eisav himself way back in Parak Lamed Zayin, when Eisav came to attack Yaakov as he left the house of Lavan. Shrebar says in the pasuk, "Asher korcha b'derech," that he came upon you on the road. Fine. Rabbi Zechariah says, "Nechad Eisav haya Amalek." Amalek was the grandson of Eisav. And in the hatred of his grandfather, he came upon the Jews to do retribution to them. I guess I'm not sure exactly what that means, but I think it means like he's sort of he's carrying out Esav's revenge on the Jews. That's what Amalek is coming to do. Now, says the Medrash, "V'hoya amud he'onan soivev es machane Yisrael ki'ir mukef es chema." The amud ha'anan, the pillar of cloud, surrounded the camp of Bnei Yisrael like a city that's surrounded by a wall. So it was a very strong protection Bnei Yisrael had. The Anani Amud Anan, also known as the Anani Kavod in other instances, could be the same thing, could be not. There's what to talk about. But Al Kapanim, let's call it the Anani Kavod, protected Bnei Yisrael just like a wall protects a walled city. Completely surrounds them. And neither tzar nor oyev would be able to touch the Jews. Tzar and oyev are different degrees of enemies. I think the tzar actually goes out and does harm to you. The oyev only thinks about doing harm to you, or he would be happy if harm befell you, but he's not going to actively go out and do it. I think the Malbim in Sefer Yoyer Or says this pshat, the difference between the word tzar and oyev. Al Kaponim, so no enemy was able to touch the Jews. They were untouchable because they had this protective cloud around them. So then how could Amalek affect them? Anyone who needed tefillah, anyone who needed ritual immersion in mikvah, the cloud would spit out a person who needed tefillah, who needed to go to the mikvah, spit him out outside of the camp of Bnei Yisrael, because the camp of Bnei Yisrael was kadosh. It was a holy camp. Shinema, as it says in the pasuk, also in this upcoming week's parasha, it says, "V'hayom achanecha kadosh." Your camp shall be holy. So since the camp of Bnei Yisrael had to be holy, so people who needed to go to the mikvah were spit out of the protection of the Ananiya Kavod, and as we're going to see, Amalek was able to attack specifically those people because they were vulnerable. Amalek went and attacked these vulnerable people.
Who was kicked out?
So let's see exactly what we're talking about. It says that people who needed tefillah, kol misha hayat tzarich tefillah, a person who needed tefillah. So what does that mean? So first of all, the Rambam makes the point that like this. First of all, he wants to say that it's pashut that when Bnei Yisrael were traveling, when they were in the Machne Yisrael, you can't just like walk out of the Ananiya Kaveh, just to go for a stroll. Like for example, you wanted a nice breeze. The Gemara in Yevamah says that the Ananiya Kaveh blocked the wind from coming into Machne Yisrael. So if you wanted to go to get a nice breeze, you can't just like walk out of the Anania covered in order to get the nice breeze. That people didn't do that. You didn't leave the Anania covered for no reason at all. So the Medrash over here is saying that you would only leave if you were tamei. The shaila is what type of tumah are we talking about over here, and why did you have to leave? So it says like this. Let's say we're talking about balkari, right? A man who had a seminal emission. He's a balkari. He's tamei. He has to go to the mikvah, right? And then he could become tahor at sundown, right? So the Radal says, Avada, that's not what we're talking about. It can't be that we're talking about balkari, because the balkari is mutter to live in Machanei Yisrael. I mean, all of Bnei Yisrael, they lived with their wives in Machanei Yisrael all 40 years while they were in the desert. They had children, etc. There was a whole another generation. And it doesn't make sense to say that they had to leave Machanei Yisrael. A Balkari is allowed to stay in Machanei Yisrael. Right? A Balkari is only mechuyev to leave Machanei Leviyah. And in fact, the Gemara says that the Leviim, so their wives would live in Machanei Yisrael, so that when they would be with their wives, and they would become Tamei Balkari, so then they wouldn't be Metam and Machanei Leviyah. They would only be in Machanei Yisrael. But Stam, a regular Balkari, you're allowed to be in Machanei Yisrael. Yeah, what?
We're talking about when Amalek attacked?
Yes.
People who left? This is what I'm asking, because this is before Halacha. This is before the Torah.
Okay, so there are rayas. There are rayas that they were noyeg the idea of Balkari even before Matan Torah. So that's
the only tumah we're talking about.
Yeah, so far that's only what we're talking about. But that idea the Radal rejects, right? He's saying it can't be Balkari, right? And Balkari is the only tumah. Let's say Balkari is the only tumah that we find that they kept before Matan Torah. Then he speaks on the next step. He says maybe we're talking about a different type of tumah. Let's say a mitzora, a person who has tzaras. Right? So a person who has tzaras, he is mechuyev to leave all three camps: Machanei Shechina, Machanei Leviyah, Machanei Yisrael. He has to leave all three camps. But the Radal says, but we can't be talking about Mitzvah, because the tumah of Mitzvah only came about when Hashem gave over the Torah by Har Sinai. Beforehand, there was no such thing as a Mitzvah. Right? And furthermore, the idea that a Mitzvah has to leave the camps is said way later on in Parshas Bamidbar Naslai. It says, "V'chol tzarua v'yishalchu min hamachana kol tzarua v'chol zav." Right? And that was said on Rosh Chodesh Nisan of the second year after Yetzias Mitzrayim, and we're talking about right after the original Yetzias Mitzrayim. So we're talking about like mamish came out a year earlier. So it's very difficult to say that we're talking about a Mitzvah or one of the other, or Zav or something like that. That we can't say. So Radal says, what are we talking about? He says, Avada, we're talking about a Balkari. And like we said before, that Balkari, we find that they were makbid on Tumas Kari even before Matan Torah. Rather what? He says that for some reason, and he doesn't explain why, for some reason the mikvah was outside of the machane. To go to the mikvah, you would have to leave the anan. So that's why they were going out. Not because there's a din that if you're tamei you have to leave the machane, but because I guess it was a practical thing or something. For some reason, he doesn't explain why, for some reason the makam atfila wasn't there. And you have to leave.
It's also shver because the mayim was in the camp.
The Mayim was in the camp because they're in the desert. Yeah, I hear.
They're
in the desert. So where are they getting water from? A special nace.
Yeah. Special nace, and you don't have to leave the camp. And also, at this point, we're talking about. I still don't get it because we're talking about the attack of Amalek on Am Yisrael.
Yeah.
This is the day after Yom Suf. A couple of days after Yom Suf.
Yeah.
They're traveling. They're moving. They're going towards Har Sinai.
Yeah.
They're not camped. They're moving.
No, when I say camp, when we say camp, we don't necessarily mean that they're settled in one place.
Asher karacha baderech. It doesn't mean to say that they were literally walking, but it means they're not in a state of mamish being camped.
I don't know if that's true because it says that they went to Refidim, and it sounded like they stopped in Refidim for a day or two. Okay, it could be like.
But this is I understand this will still be before that. Before Refidim. This is mamish like minutes after Yom Suf, and they left Yom Suf and Amalek.
No, Amalek was in Refidim. It says when they got to Refidim, in Refidim. Yeah.
And they attacked them. I thought it's just before Refidim, on their way to Refidim.
I don't think so.
I don't remember exactly.
The law in the pasuk says, I think that they went to. Let's look it up. where it says, "Vaysu kol adas b'nei Yisrael mimid bar sin l'maseim al pi Hashem vayachanu b'refidim." They camped in Refidim in Mayim Nishtes Ha'am, and they didn't have water. And then that was the whole story with the rock. And he hit the rock, and the water came out. There was he called the place fight because Ariv Bnei Yisrael, because of the fight with Bnei Yisrael. And the fact that they tested Hashem, saying, "Is Hashem with us in our midst?" The next pasuk says, "Vayavay Amalek." Like we pointed out before, that this pasuk of Vayavay Amalek is right after it says Hayesh Hashem b'Kibbeinu Moyen. So it says that they got to repeat it. Yeah, they weren't literally moving right now. Fine. V'Amalek haya mizanev v'hoyreg kol mish achayre he'anan. Amalek would be mizanev and kill anyone who was found behind the pillar of the pillar of clouds. It says in Pasuk, and they would be mizanev you kol nechashalim acharecha. Nechashalim is like the shorish is like chalash, the people, the stragglers from behind you, the people who are left behind. So Amalek would be mizanev them. What does it mean mizanev? So the word zonav means a tail. So sometimes you find in Lashon HaKodesh, you'll have a noun, and then if you sort of verbify that noun, it means to get rid of whatever that noun is. I'll give you an example. They have the word shirish. Yeah, the word shirish means a root. Yeah, if you have a tree and the tree has a root, the root is called a shirish. Yeah, when you uproot a tree, it's called that you're misharish the tree. What?
Also, sure, many verbs. Katz says this, but Rashi also brings shorish also means to put a shorish in.
To put it in. Right, yeah, fine.
So,
but I'm saying, but I'm trying to bring a slightly different point. Yeah. When the word sharish means a root. When you're misharish, so that means you're uprooting. You're pulling out the root. It's sort of it means taking away what that noun is. So a zonav is a tail. If you're mizanev somebody, it means you're cutting off his tail. You're getting rid of the tail. So Amalek was mizanev b'nei Yisrael. They were getting rid of, quote unquote, the tail of b'nei Yisrael, meaning those stragglers, those people who were left behind outside of the Anan. So that's who Amalek went and attacked. The vulnerable people like that. Fine. Omar Moshe the Yehoshua. Moshe Rabbeinu said to Yehoshua, "B'char lanu anashim." Choose for us anashim, men. And Rashi says the anashim, the word anashim, whenever the Torah uses the word anashim, it means important men. Anashim is anashim chashuvim. So the Medrash over here darshans that in a similar way. Anashim b'nei oyev. Anashim, people who are b'nei oyev, sons of fathers, meaning sons of prominent fathers. They have good yichus. The Radal says that you need good yichus in order to fight Amalek, because Amalek has the zchus avos of Avram and Yitzchak. So you need to have something that can be able to counteract that. Anashim giborei chayach v'chayil. Anashim, men, strong men, people who are good fighters. Giborei chayach v'chayil. Maybe that means that they were strong in limud Torah as well. Yirei shamayim, people who have fear of heaven. V'tzei hilachim Amalek. It says b'chal anashim v'tzei hilachim Amalek, and go out and fight Amalek with these people. There's a medrash that says that Amalek, they were big bali kishuf, and they used to do all kinds of like spells with mazalos and whatever in order to dirty warfare, right? Slight-handed warfare. So the medrash says that Yehoshua Dafka chose people who were born in other sheni, that they don't have a mazal that rules over them, so that Amalek wouldn't be able to do their kishuf on these people. Because each
Adar Sheni is the month of Adar.
Yeah,
Aleph.
Yeah, it's a good question. You have to know what it means that Adar Sheni is the real Adar. In what way Adar Sheni is the real Adar. But it's in some ways it is, in some ways Adar Rishon is the real Adar. I don't know. But Al Kapanim, every month has its zodiac influence, whatever, from the different mazalas. But the month of Adar, only the first Adar is Mazal Dagim. The second Adar is not Dagim anymore. It's something else. There is no Kayach over it. So that's why Yehoshua Dafka chose those men. Fine. So that's the Medrash. Moshe, Aaron, V'chur. Moshe, Aaron, V'chur, Amdu, b'makom gavoya b'seich machane Yisrael. Moshe and his brother Aaron and Hur. You know who Hur was? Hur was the son of Moshe and Aaron's sister Miriam. We're going to see that in the next paragraph. In paragraph Mem Hey, the Medrash talks about who Hur was. So Moshe, Aaron, and Hur were standing together. Amdu b'makom gavoa. They were standing in a high place. B'seich machane Yisrael. Within the camp of Bnei Yisrael, within where Bnei Yisrael was hanging out. They were in a makom gavoya, as the pasuk says. They said all reisha giva. They went on the top of the giva. Stam al derech hadrush, you could maybe say that we said way back when in Parak Hey that when we talk about there's a Gemara in Psachim that says that. It's talking about Mashiach coming, whatever. Medalig al harim, jumping over the mountains. Mekapitz al gvois, skipping over the gvois or hills. Har is a mountain and gvois are hills. So the Gemara says mekapitz al medalig al harim, that's chus avos. Mekapitz al gvois is chus imohis. So you see that the Giva has to do specifically with the Imois of Bnei Yisrael, and the Har has to do specifically with the Ovis of Bnei Yisrael. We spoke about that way back in Parak Hey. And I also spoke about, I think in either Memtes or Nun, when we spoke about Purim, it was almost 2 years ago already. So that we said an idea that Amalek has a specific opposition to the women of Bnei Yisrael. They have a specific opposition to the women. It says that the Medrash says that they would dafka cut off the bris milah of the Bnei Yisrael and throw it in the air and say, "Oh, who's Hashem?" Right? They would dafka do things. Eisav dafka was mechabed his father, but he disregarded his mother in a lot of ways. For example, it says that Eisav disregarded his mother. It says, let's say, for example, it says that Eisav said that, soon my father is going to die, and then I'm going to go and kill Yaakov. Well, what about his mother? He doesn't care that his mother is going to be upset if he kills Yaakov? Yeah, he didn't care about his mother. We find in different ways that Eisav had a certain opposition. Eisav and Amalek had a certain opposition to the imois, to the feminine aspect of Bnei Yisrael. This is why we said it over there, because when Shmuel Hanavi killed Agag, the king of Amalek, so his last words, Shmuel Hanavi said, as he took the sword and sliced him, he said, "Kasher shikol nashim charbecha, kein tishakel minoshim imecha." Shmuel Hanavi said, just like your sword rendered Jewish women, rendered Jewish women childless, so too this sword will render your mother childless. So Shmuel Hanavi, for some reason, focused on the avla, on the iniquities that Amalek did against the Jewish women. By killing the men, they were doing something against the women, so Shmuel Hanavi is saying, so now we're getting revenge that your mother is going to be childless. Why did he focus on the women? Because we see that Amalek has something against the women. So I wanted to say that maybe that's why Moshe, Aaron, and Hur, Dafka went up Bakan Gavoya to what? To what the pasuk says, Ola Reisha Giva. They went to the Giva. And we said that the Giva is the schus imohis. So we're specifically trying to arouse, to be ma'ir, the schus of the imohis in order to defeat Amalek. Something like that. Echad miminay shel Moshe ve'echad mismoilay. So we said Moshe, Aaron, and Hur. One was on the right side of Moshe Rabbeinu, and one was on the left side of Moshe Rabbeinu. The Radal brings the Zohar. The Zohar says that Aaron was on the right side, and Hur was on the left side. It's really, the Amos says that it's Al Pi Gemara. The Gemara says that when you have three people, either when they're sitting to eat a meal or walking on the road or whatever, so when you have three people, the most chashuv one is supposed to be in the middle, the second chashuv is supposed to be on his right, and the third chashuv is on his left. So Moshe Rabbeinu is in the middle, Aaron, the second chashuv, is on his right, and Hur, the third chashuv, is on his left. Mikanat Olamed, from here you learn, and this is a very interesting point, from here you learn, Shishliach Tzibur Osir lehispalel im ein shom shnayim oimdim. The Shliach Tzibur, the Chazzan, the Chazzan of the shul, whatever, Osir lehispalel, it's forbidden for him to pray in ein shom shnayim oimdim, unless there's two people standing there. What does that mean? What does it seems to be saying? That a Chazzan is not, you're not allowed to daven for the Amid unless there's two people flanking you, one guy on your right, one guy on your left. There has to be three people standing there when you're davening for the Amid. You and two other people. Otherwise, you're not allowed to daven for the Amid. That's what the Medrash is saying, And l'chora it's mashma. It doesn't say on a specific day or a specific tefillah. It sounds like that's how it's always supposed to be. That's the l'chora. That's the mashmos over here. Now, the Halagoyis Maimonis in the end of Hilchos Shvisas Asar. Hilchos Shvisas Asar is the Rambam calls the halachas of Yom Kippur. Shvisa is resting. Asar means the 10th, being the 10th of Tishrei. So the Halagoyis Maimonis in the end of Hilchos Shvisas Asar, as well as the Mordechai in the end of Mesachos Yoma, they bring this medrash and they apply it. The Mordechai applies it specifically to Yom Kippur, and the Halagoyis Maimonis says Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and they say that there is a halacha on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, or just on Yom Kippur, that the Chazzan has to be flanked by two people. One guy on his right, one guy on his left. In order to daven for the Amid, you have to have two people standing with the Chazzan.
It's very funny. It comes from, the source is Amdu B'makom Gavoa.
Yeah.
Shliach Tzibor, usually stands is a Yerida.
Oh, so
Sorry.
It's a good ha'ara. The Radal actually discusses it in Chav Gimel, in parentheses. He discusses it. I didn't want to get into it. I mean, I wasn't so bothered by it. But if you're interested in it, you can see the Radal talks about it.
Very interesting.
That usually the Chazzan goes down, and here it sounds like the Chazzan is going up.
In old shuls that they found in Eretz Israel,
that's how it was.
Lower, a square lower than.
I would say there's a shul like that. There's at least one shul like that in LA. There's a shul.
Yeah?
Yavna. Kilas Yavna is built like that. It's like a stadium. The Chazzan is like all the way down in the middle, and everyone else is above him, with like bleachers and. Al Kaponim. So that's what the Mordechai and the Halagoyis Maimonis bring down, that on Rosh Hashanah or Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, or on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the halacha is that the Chazzan is only supposed to daven if there's two people on his sides with him. Now, this halacha is actually brought down in the Shulchan Aruch in two places. One is in Orach Chaim Siman Tov Reish Yud Tes. The Shulchan Aruch brings it down in regard to Yom Kippur. And one is in Siman Tov Kuf Samech Vav in regard to fast days. The Shulchan Aruch also brings this down, that the Chazzan has to be flanked by two people. And the Torah in both of those places as well brings the Medrash and says this Medrash is the source for this halacha, that the Chazzan has to be flanked by two people on those times. Now, we have a few shadows over here. First of all, the Medrash over here seems to be saying that it's always. But elsewhere, it seems like it's only on Yom Kippur, or only Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So what's up with that? So the Bach in Siman Tov Reish Yud Tes in Hilchos Yom Kippur says that the understanding is like this. Our Medrash is saying that when the tzibur is in tzar, when the tzibur is in a painful or distressful situation, then we have this halacha. Just like in Milchemes Amalek, everyone else was busy fighting, and Moshe Rabbeinu with Moshe Aaron and Hur, we're davening. So when everyone else is in the tzar and you're davening, so then there's a halacha that you're supposed to have two people standing with you. And that's why on Yom Kippur, because Bnei Yisrael is in tzar on Yom Kippur, dafka on Yom Kippur we're supposed to have the Chazzan with us. We're supposed to have two people with the Chazzan. And also on the time of tzibur, so he wants to say that by Milchemes Amalek, there's another medrash that says that they were geyser a time of tzibur in our story over here. When they were fighting Amalek, they made a special decree that everyone should fast, which is somewhat counterintuitive, because if you're fasting, you want to have energy. But it's a special thing to be ma'ur, to get rachamim from Hashem, to be fasting. So because that's what they did when they were fasting, so as Kilo goes zecher to that, whenever we fast, we also do this. That's what the Bach says. Now, we said that the Halagoyis Maimonis, when he brings this down, he says Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah. So what happened to Rosh Hashanah? Let's just go with the Shulchan Aruch, right? When the Shulchan Aruch brings it down, he says the time of tzibur and he says Yom Kippur. What about Rosh Hashanah? So the Bach says the reason why we don't bring this down in Hilchos Rosh Hashanah is because the Hagais Maimonides was going according to the minute that some Rishonim had that you fast on Rosh Hashanah. All the Rishonim were very busy with this. Hilchos Rosh Hashanah, are you allowed to fast on Rosh Hashanah? Should you fast on Rosh Hashanah, etc. And the Mefarshim come out. There were different minhagim, and there were Rishonim that used to fast on Rosh Hashanah, and there were times and places when people would fast on Rosh Hashanah. But nowadays we don't do that. It could be it's one of the reasons why there is a minute to fast on Erev Rosh Hashanah, but we don't fast on Rosh Hashanah itself. But he says that the Hagais Maimonides, who brings down that there's an inyan to have two people standing by the Chazzan on Rosh Hashanah, he was going to see that minute that they used to fast on Rosh Hashanah. So Rosh Hashanah was like a fast day, like Yom Kippur and Tainus Tzibur. Yeah. But the shadow is like this. Lamaisa, the shadow is like this. Lamaisa, we don't do this halacha. The Mechaber and the Shulchan Aruch brings this down in Hilchos Tainus Tzibur and in Hilchos Yom Kippur. We don't follow this halacha. We don't have two people standing by the Chazzan on a Tainus Tzibur or on Rosh Hashanah or on Yom Kippur. We don't do it. So what happened over here? Why don't we follow this halacha? So the Bach asks this as a question. And the Bach says, like, what do we do? We do something similar to this. It's not the exact same thing. What do we do? What we do is that on Leil Kol Nidre, by Kol Nidre, on the night of Yom Kippur, we have, when the Chazzan says Kol Nidre, so there's a guy standing on his right and a guy standing on his left. That is the minute. That is something that, I don't know if everyone all over Klal Yisrael does this, but wherever I've been, that's what they do. We people do that. That is the minute. Kol Nidre, we do have two people at Chazzan. Okay, but what about the rest of the davening in Yom Kippur? What about Tainus Tzibur? We don't follow the Shulchan Aruch. So the Bach says, that's why I want to say that really the halacha is we should always have two people standing by the Chazzan on the entire davening in Yom Kippur and whenever we daven on Tainus Tzibur. That's what the Bach says. So if you know the Bach, if you're familiar with the Bach, it's very matim to the Bach to say such a thing. The Bach is a big machmer. Even there's a lot of interesting that the Bach comes out like l'chumra, even though nobody else does that. No one in the world does it. The Bach says this chumra. You're supposed to have two people standing by the Chazzan on the entire Yom Kippur and by Tainus Tzibur. The Magen Avraham says a different approach. The Magen Avraham brings the Bach's kasha, and the Magen Avraham says, "I'll tell you why we don't do it. The reason why we don't do it is because really there's no such thing as technically there's no such thing as a Tainus Tzibur nowadays. We don't have a real Tainus Tzibur. The only real Tainus Tzibur we have, I guess, would be Yom Kippur, which he sort of ignores. But we don't have a real Tainus Tzibur. So the only reason why we do it by Kol Nidre is because there's an inyan to have three people because you're doing a Tars Nadarim, so it's like a Beis Din, so you have three people. But that's why we have three people. And really we're not going with this halacha. He doesn't say it in those words, but that's what he means to say. The Machzis HaShekel, which is one of the Mefarshim on the Magen Avraham, in some Tarfresh test in Hilchos Yom Kippur, the Machzis HaShekel says that the pshat in the Magen Avraham is al pi what the Ramah in Darkei Moshe says. Apparently the Ramah in Darkei Moshe writes that we don't paskin like this Pirkei Dev Eliezer. We don't paskin like this medrash over here. And
was that? Oh,
the Machzis HaShekel brings the b'shem the Ramah in Darkei Moshe. Now, my problem is that if you look in the Darkei Moshe, the Ramah doesn't say that. Not in the short Darkei Moshe, not in the long Darkei Moshe, not in Siman Tov Reishu Tes, not in Siman Tov Kuf Samach Vav. I don't know where he's quoting this Ramah from, and I didn't see anybody pointing out that there is no such Ramah. But they bring down he's quoting a Ramah, and I couldn't find this Ramah anywhere. Maybe it is. I missed the boat somewhere. I don't know. But Al Kapanim, the Machzis HaShekel learns in the Magen Avraham that the pshat is we don't pass him like this Pirkei Dev Eliezer B'chal. We don't pass him like it. The Prisha, which is one of the Mefarshim, the Ikar Mefarshim on the tour, the Prisha in Siman Tav Kuf Samach Vav in Hilchos Tainus, he says 4 other answers why we don't do this nowadays, or why we don't have to follow this. What the Medrash over here says. First of all, he says that the reason why you need 2 people standing with the Chazzan is so that you have 2 people that are like kilo davening with the Chazzan, as if nobody else is really davening with the Chazzan. But the Prisha says that nowadays every guy who's in shul has his own machzor. So whether we're talking about Yom Kippur, whether we're talking about Tainas Tzibor, everyone's davening on his own. You don't need two people to be with the Chazzan in order to daven. Everyone's davening, so it's beseder. So we don't need to follow what the Medrash says over here. That's the first teretz. The second teretz is a similar thing. It says that why do you need two people to stand with the Chazzan? To make sure that the Chazzan doesn't mess up. So they're standing over him, the Chazzan has his siddur or whatever, and they're standing over to make sure he doesn't skip a paragraph or whatever. Right? But nowadays, everyone has a machzor, everyone has a siddur. So you don't need two people standing over the Chazzan to make sure he doesn't mess up. If he messes up, the whole crowd is going to start screaming at him because everyone sees it. So those are two teretzim. The third teretz he says is that the halacha that Pirkei Eliezer says over here that you need two people standing with the Chazzan is only on a tainas tzibor where you're davening the entire day. But if you're not davening mamish the entire day, then there's no such halacha. So that would l'chora answer. He says that by Moshe Rabbeinu when they were fighting Amalek, they were davening the entire day straight. So this l'chor would answer the question from Tainas Tzibor, because on Tainas Tzibor we're not davening the entire day. But I don't know if you could say that it answers the question from Yom Kippur. In Yom Kippur, we're davening the entire day. Maybe it's because we're not saying slichus the entire day on Yom Kippur. We're not. On Yom Kippur, it's true that we daven the entire day, but us Ashkenazim, what are we busy with davening on Yom Kippur? We're busy with singing all kinds of piyutim about the Malchus of Hashem, and singing all kinds of things about talking about the Avodah, etc. Yeah, what slichus do we do? We do slichus just by Ma'ariv, at the end of Ma'ariv, by Ne'ilah. That's it. We do very little slichus. Historically, people used to do much more slichus, but nowadays so we're not really davening slichus the entire day. Maybe that's how you would answer the question according to this teretz the Prisha. The fourth teretz the Prisha is that our medrash is simply saying a practical thing. Why should there be two people standing by the Chazzan? Because in case the Chazzan falls or whatever, so someone's going to help him up. Someone so he can lean on somebody if need be. But if we don't need it, you don't need it. It's just a practical thing. I mean, I've seen in the Mir Yeshiva on Yom Kippur by Rabbi Aryeh Finkel Shlita. Oh, Zatzal, I'm sorry. Zatzal, he was just nifter. I'm used to saying Shlita, but how many? Yeah, Shlishim was this week. Uh-huh. So by Rabbi Aryeh Finkel Zatzal, it just feels weird to say it. But Rabbi Aryeh Finkel Zatzal, when he would daven for Amid on Yom Kippur, so there were two people standing on his side that would help him when you had to bow down. Besides standing on his side by Kol Nidre, there were also people that were helping him to bow down, and help him get down, and help him get back up, etc. What?
Even though the Prisha says you don't really need that anymore, he was being yotze.
Yeah. No, I'm saying it was a practical. No, it's a practical matter. Yeah. Fine. Let's go back to All Yisrael oimdim chutz lahalehem. All of Bnei Yisrael were standing outside of their tents. And they saw Moshe Rabbeinu bowing on his knees, and they also bowed on their knees. They saw Moshe Rabbeinu fall with his face on the ground, and then they fell with their face on the ground, prostrated themselves on the ground. They saw Moshe Rabbeinu spreading out his hands towards the heavens. And they also spread out their hands towards their Father in the heaven. Now, interestingly, by Moshe it said El Hashamayim, to the heavens, and here by the people it says Lavihim Shabashamayim, to their Father in the heavens. It didn't say to their Father by Moshe Rabbeinu. Stop. From here you learn Shishliach Tzibra HaMispalel, when the Shliach Tzibra, when the Chazzan is praying, Kach Kol Ha'am Oinin Acharav Amen. Just like whatever the Chazzan says when he prays, so too everyone answers back to him afterwards. They say Amen, because they meaning actually there's a shaila if you regard the word Amen. Our Gersa says Amen. The Radha brings from the Yalkut Shemaini and the Ramban, and I found in the Higra edition it doesn't say the word Amen. So either the pshat is saying like this, like whatever the Chazzan says, so the people repeat after the Chazzan. You're saying in what's it called, stansively. That's what I'm looking for. Responsively, the Chazzan says it, and then everyone repeats after the Chazzan. Or it means that the Chazzan says the bracha, and then everyone says Amen. It's as if they repeated it afterwards, as if they said it. It could be. It's not a Machlokes. We're talking about different things. So when you say Kaladin, so the people repeat after the Chazzan. When you say Chazar Sashatz, so the people say Amen. They don't repeat what the Chazzan said. But the Radal points out an interesting thing over here. The Radal says that if you look in the Psukim, when it's talking about the war with Amalek, it doesn't say anywhere in the Psukim that Moshe Rabbeinu bowed down. So where do we get this idea that Moshe Rabbeinu bowed down from? He says that don't tell me that it was the bowing down of the regular Shemon Esrei, the davening, that Moshe Rabbeinu was bowing down during davening, and they were just mimicking what Moshe Rabbeinu was doing, because the halacha is, the Gemara in Brachas says that it's Machlokes in Gemara in Brachas Daf Mem Lamed Aleph. The Gemara says that what do we do? You and I, so we bow in the beginning of the first bracha, and then we bow at the end of the first bracha of Magen Avraham, and then we bow by Moedim, and then we bow by the end of the bracha of Moedim of Hator Shemachol Chana Ala Haydais. Right? We bow 4 times in Shemon Esrei. Right? The Gemara says that a king, Melech B'Yisrael, so he bows at the beginning and end of every single bracha in Shemon Esrei. And then there's another opinion in the Gemara that says that no, the king, he bows in the beginning of Shemon Esrei, and he has to keep himself all the way down until the end of Shemon Esrei. So you see that the halachas of a king are different than the halachas for everyone else. So now, Moshe Rabbeinu, the Gemara in Zvachim Kuf Beis says that Moshe Rabbeinu had the halachic status of a king. Now, if Moshe Rabbeinu had the halachic status of a king, and we're saying that even though the pasuk doesn't say that he bowed by the war of Amalek, but you could assume that he bowed because it was part of Shemon Esrei that you're supposed to bow. So then, how could everyone else mimic him? How could they learn from his deeds? What Moshe Rabbeinu was doing could be was specific to a king. A king is supposed to bow at certain places in Shemon Esrei that the masses are not supposed to do, because the Gemara says a king. There's more of a reason for a king to have gaiva, to be haughty. So we have to sort of subdue the king's haughtiness by making him be extra subservient to Hashem and doing extra bowing. But a regular person, there's no havamina that you should be haughty, right? The pasuk says by a melech that he's in last week's parsha. It says that he's supposed to have a sefer Torah with him with vilti rumu levove me'achav, so that his heart won't go above everyone else. Right? But a person who's not a king, there's no such chashash. So you're not supposed to do all these things. So then how could it be that they were mimicking Moshe? Where are they getting that from that they should mimic him? A little bit difficult over here. Al Kapanim, so Moshe Rabbeinu was doing these things. He would bow, they would bow, he would go on the floor, they would go on the floor, he would put out his hands to the Father in heaven, they would put out their hands to their Father in heaven. And as the Mishnah in Mesachas Rosh Hashanah says, the famous Mishnah, Daf Chav Tes and Aleph, it says, V'chiyodov shel Moshe Rabbeinu, the hands of Moshe Rabbeinu, is that what makes people successful in war or not successful in war? It's not the hands. Ela bizman she saw mistaklin klape milo, when Moshe Rabbeinu's hands are spread out towards the heaven, and Ben Yisrael looks up to the heavens. So then Rishadin Lislibam Lavim Shabashamayim, and they make their hearts subjugated to Hashem. So then the matzliach in the war, and when they're not, when Hashem said Moshe Rabbeinu's hands would come down, and people would sort of lose their faith in Hashem, that's when they would be less successful. The success in the war had nothing to do with Moshe Rabbeinu's hands, it had to do with the spiritual state of the people. Hashem had smitten Amalek and its nation lefi chorev, according to the sword. Shneimar, it says in the pasuk v'yachalei Yehoshua es Amalek, ve'es Amalek lefi chorev. That's the lashon of the pasuk. Fine. Maybe as I'm reading this now, I realized a point over here. It says it's Amalek v'es Amalek. Hashem weakened Amalek and his nation. What does that tell you? It tells you that Amalek, the Zayda Amalek, he was there leading the war. He was still alive. Yeah, it was him and his nation. That makes sense. Earlier in the parak we said I was bothered by this. Now I think we have an answer. It says that when it says usually when you come people are coming on the road, so you give them bread and you give them food and drink to greet them. Vuhu, and he saw them tired, game and worn out. And he didn't put on his heart. He stood on the road like a bear, etc. It didn't say they; it said he in singular form. So it sounds like it's talking about Amalek himself. and then his nation is just following his orders. And then the next line it said, Necher Eisav haya Amalek. Amalek was the grandson of Eisav, and he was doing his father's revenge. It sounds like we're talking about he himself. I just realized that now. We're talking about Amalek himself, and the nation was just following his lead. They're just following orders, so to speak.
So too, we. The Israel was following.
Vayar Yisrael, it says.
He fell on his face.
Oh, I thought you were going to say something else. Because Vayar Yisrael, the Medrash says the Yisrael Saba, that for somehow it means that Yaakov Avinu was there by Kriyas Yamsuf, and then it says Es Mitzrayim, it's talking about the Mitzrayim Saba, the original Zayda Mitzrayim, the son of Ucham. I don't know. I'll just do a few more lines. Rabbi Shila Oimer, Rabbi Shila says, Rotza Kadosh Baruch Hu lahachris ulahashmin is called Zarei Shel Amalek. Kadosh Baruch Hu wanted to cut off and to destroy all the descendants, all the seed of Amalek. Me'asa Kadosh Baruch Hu, what did Hashem do? Poshat Yad Yeminoi, he stretched out his right hand, which is imagery that we've seen a few times in the Pirkei Eliezer to mean that Hashem is going to make a promise. V'achaz b'kisei kvoidai, and he held on to this kisei kvoid, which is not literal because Hashem doesn't really have a hand. But we see that there's an idea of holding on to a chapsa shel mitzvah, nikitas chayfetz. It's called holding on to a chapsa shel mitzvah when you make a promise, when you make an oath, in order to make it a more serious oath. Like they do in the court, where you hold a Bible to make it show that it's a real oath. So Kadosh Baruch Hu was holding on to the kisei kavod, v'nishpa, and Hashem swore lahachris ulahashmid es kol zarei shel Amalek min ha'olam hazeh u'min ha'olam haba. Hashem swore that He's going to cut off and destroy all the seed of Amalek from this world and from the next world. Shneimar, it says in the pasuk, kiyad al keis ka, His hand, meaning the hand of Hashem, is on the keis ka. Case is the chair, like kisei. So His hand is on the chair of Hashem. Meaning Hashem put His hand on His chair to make this promise that there will be Milchamala Hashem ba'Amalek. There'll be a war of Hashem in Amalek, fighting against Amalek, midor dor, from generation to generation. Those are the ending words of next week's parsha of Parshas Kisei, of what we read in Parshas Zachor. Everyone calls it Parshas Zachor, right? But it's not really. If you hear a guy leaning and he says Zachor, so you should walk out because that's not how you're supposed to read it. Zachor. Zachor, it's not Zachor, it's Zachor.
Zachor is a command to remember.
Yeah. No, Zachor, whatever, yeah. If you hear a guy saying Zachor, he's saying it wrong. It's Zachor. Zachor. So Hashem made this promise that He's going to wipe them out. Min ha'olam hazeh, min ha'olam haba. That's why it said, the Marzut says, that's why it says, midor dor. For generation to generation, meaning the generation of Olam Hazeh, the generation of Olam Haba, Hashem is going to wipe them out. Fine. We'll stop over here.